Hello students, this is Mr. Dean, and today I'm talking about Chapter 17, giving an introduction to the chapter about evolution. So I'm going to use this as an opportunity to introduce my friend Chuck. Everyone say hi, Chuck. This is Chuck, also known as Charles Darwin. Most of our ideas about how evolution works were initiated by Darwin. That doesn't mean they haven't been changed over time, but I will affectionately refer to him as Chuck throughout the lecture. Anyways, here is young Chuck when he was just out of university, I believe. Here is middle-aged Chuck. And here is Chuck as an old man with a little more gray in his beard than what I have. I can only aspire to having a beard like that someday. Going on with a few details about Chuck's life, Charles Darwin and this gentleman, Abraham Lincoln, have something in common. And the thing that they have in common is that they both have the same birthday. Like, not born on the same day of the year, but literally they were born on the same day of the same year. I don't believe they ever met, but when we're talking about world events that are going on during Charles Darwin's lifetime, when you think about what's going on in America, you should be thinking about the Civil War. So that is kind of just giving you some context about the world at the time of Charles Darwin, and just to give you some perspective on how long ago it was. So, a little background about Chuck. He began his educational journey training to be a doctor. His parents were upper middle class. His grandfather was a relatively famous scientist, and so Darwin's parents said, hey, you need to follow in the family tradition, be well educated, support your family, do something with science, get a degree in medicine. However, Charles Darwin did not enjoy the classes, and most sources say that he found surgery distressing. I personally interpret that as he didn't like blood. So he did drop out of medical school. After that, his parents said, oh no, you need to get an education, you need to do something with your life. So his family had him enrolled in a religious school, and he was in training to become a priest in the Anglican tradition. So unlike Roman Catholics, an Anglican priest is free to marry and have a family. So it's more like what we would think of as a pastor. He did well in school. He got his degree, but he never used his degree. He never was the pastor at a church. He never used his degree in that manner. And in his spare time, he went around and collected beetles. Later on in life, Charles, actually shortly after graduating from university, he joined Robert Fitzroy, who was the captain of the HMS Beagle, and he went on an exploration trip around the world. Now, on the ship, Darwin was employed as the naturalist. So it was his job to go out and find cool natural things to send back to England to be sold to museums and things like that to help make income to pay for the trip, basically. So he got to go out hunting. He shot animals and would preserve the skins and preserve the bones, and those would later end up in museums back in England or in other parts of Europe. He collected seeds and leaves from plants and brought them back to Europe as well, and fossils and things like that as well. So he basically, any natural stuff he would collect and bring back to Europe. This map shows Darwin's trip on the Beagle. You can see that he left from England, went south to South America, landed a few spots of Brazil, went around the tip of South America, ended up going up to the Galapagos Islands. That will play very important in a later section of this unit. From the Galapagos Islands, went on to Australia, visited Hobart on the island of Tasman, went around the southern Cape of Africa, back to South America, and then back up to England. So that was roughly his trip on the Beagle. Just to give some context about what was going on during Darwin's time, some worldviews that people believed during the time of Darwin were these things. People believed that the species of plant animal did not change. People believed that each species of plant or animal was created perfectly for its environment, and generally people believed that the Earth was only about 6,000 years old. And Darwin's interpretation of what he saw on his trip challenged those beliefs, challenged what people thought about the world, and continue to challenge those beliefs even today. One of the things that Darwin noticed is that species vary globally. So he went around to different places on the earth, and he noticed that there were large birds in the grasslands on several continents. So we have the rhea, we have the ostrich, we have the emu, and we have the cassowary, which technically the cassowary is more of a jungle bird, but we'll let it slide. So he noticed that in different places in the world, there were similar but different species. And it challenged one of these beliefs. It challenged the belief that each species was created perfectly for its environment. Because if there was a perfect bird for the grasslands, why would a god make another perfect bird? And if there's two birds, can they both be perfect for the environment? So this kind of led to a challenging of that particular belief. He also found that species varied locally. On the Galapagos Islands, he noticed that there was a wide variety of finch beaks and shapes, but yet they all seem to be closely related birds. They seem to be just slight differences on the finch theme. And so he noticed that species varied locally. So even in one area, all the finch species were not the same. And even within one finch species, there were differences among the finches. He also noticed that species varied over time. So he saw the modern armadillo, an animal that was basically unknown to Europe, and he found fossils of this thing called a glyptodont. You may have seen these in the movie Ice Age. So he said, wait a minute. The species, they vary over time. They're not the same then as they are now, and yet there are similarities. Well, that's interesting, because he said, well, maybe this glyptodont is the great granddaddy of the armadillos that I see now. So these patterns of diversity around the world brought up many questions. Remember, observations lead to questions, just like in your warm-ups for class. So he asked questions like, why are there rabbits in England but kangaroos in Australia? Why do the grasslands of Australia have similar plants and climates to the grasslands of Argentina and South America, and yet their animals are so different? Think about kangaroos versus, I don't even know what the large grazing animal is in South America. I'm not sure what there is. And then also, why are animals on two nearby islands so similar and yet sometimes so different from each other? And which leads us to the Galapagos Islands. One of the most famous stops of the Beagle was on the Galapagos Islands. On the Galapagos Islands, Darwin noticed some interesting things. He looked at the tortoises, the finches, and the iguanas. So we're going to look at each of those as well. So the Galapagos Islands, how did the tortoises get there? They can't swim. And why are they so similar and yet not all the same? So you can see here's a map. It shows some of the different tortoises from the Galapagos Islands. Some of them have necks that can reach upward. Some of them have necks that can't reach upward. They don't have that notch in their shell. So there's differences. They're not all the same. It's another example of local differences. He noticed the finches. Well, how did they get there? It's too far to fly. Why are there so many similarities and yet still so many differences? So he looked especially at the beaks of the ground finches. He looked at the iguanas. There were 3 different species of land iguanas and 1 species of marine iguana. And these marine iguanas are unique in the entire world. And you may recognize them because I think that they're relatives of Godzilla. While he was on the ship, Darwin did a lot of reading and thinking. He had a lot of opportunity between different stops and different ports to read books and to think about things. And this was, between skinning animals and preserving them and drawing flowers and all the other things that he was doing as a naturalist. But some of the authors that affected him were Hutton and Lyell. They were both geologists. Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, he was a biologist who actually proposed evolution before Darwin, but we've now seen that maybe his mechanism was flawed. And then an economist named Thomas Malthus, who had a huge impact on Darwin's thinking. So James Hutton was a geologist. He wrote The Principles of Geology. His big ideas are this. The layers of rock, called strata, that we see on the Earth form over long periods of time. The Earth's surface is changed by natural forces. Rain caused erosion, heat and cold can cause rocks to crack and break, And mountains are being slowly pushed up over time, which is why we see sea animal fossils on the tops of mountains. And James Hutton concluded that the Earth must be millions of years old in order for these surface changes that he observed to have occurred. And remember, before this, people thought the Earth was only like 6,000 years old. So this is giving more time for evolution to work. Another geologist was Charles Lyell, and his big idea was that the present is the key to the past. He said that the things we see happening in the world today can be used to describe how the world got to the way it is we see it today. He said things like, we have observed that earthquakes lift the land up, therefore maybe some of the mountains that we see today were lifted by earthquakes. We have observed magma or lava becoming rocks, therefore if we find a rock that looks like those rocks, it probably was made by magma at some point in the past. So Darwin started thinking, if the Earth can change over millions of years, if the Earth hasn't been the same for all this time, maybe living things can change as well. Next is Jean-Baptiste Lamarck, and his idea for evolution is sometimes called the inheritance of acquired characteristics. His idea is use it or lose it. So if an animal used parts of its body, they would grow and become greater, and if they didn't use them, they would shrink and be lost over time, which does match some observations about the world, but it doesn't match all of them, because by his theory, if you went to the gym a lot and worked out a lot, then your children would inherit larger muscles from you. And we know that's not always true. Here's another counterexample. There are some breeds of dog that have their ears and tail docked, cut off when they're puppies. And this has happened for many, 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 many generations. So those dogs have never used those ears or tails in their original function because they've been cut off, so they never used them. But we don't see puppies being born naturally docked without their ears, without their full ears, without their full tail. So there are some issues with Jean-Baptiste Lamarck's ideas. However, Lamarck was influencing to Darwin because he was proposing ideas of how living things could change, which challenged one of the prevailing worldviews at the time of Darwin, which was that living things don't change. Finally was Thomas Malthus. He was an economist. His big idea was that human population is growing too fast for the resources to support it. Think about what we learned about in the first semester, and we talked about these exponential growth curves. So if you look here, this is a map of human population, and it's growing exponentially, and when will it end? And it turns out that now we might have started to reach the tipping point, but at Malthus's time, we had not. So Darwin applied these ideas to all living things. He said, if a plant produces thousands of seeds, there's not going to be enough space for all of those seeds to grow. There's not going to be enough sunlight for all those plants. There's not going to be enough water for all those plants. So basically, that's going to lead to something called survival of the fittest, because only the ones that are best able are going to survive and reproduce. Another idea that impacted Charles Darwin was artificial selection. The idea that farmers for generations had been breeding organisms, living things, with only the characteristics they wanted, and that led to many different types of domestic animals. So, for example, the wolf led to all these varieties of dog that we see today. Darwin bred pigeons, and he knew that all of them came from the rock dove. And finally, there's a bunch of vegetables that some of you may not like, but they all have the same ancestor. Brussels sprouts, cauliflower, broccoli, kale, and kohlrabi all come from the same ancestor, and they've gotten to the way they are today because of artificial selection, humans choosing what traits go on. So here is a summary of Darwin's thoughts. I would pause the video at this point if I were you and read each of them. Basically, all species produce more offspring than what can survive. I'm going to run out of time here in a moment. Not all members of a species are the same, and mutations provide variation, but Darwin didn't know about mutations. All members compete for resources, and the members with the best traits survive and have more offspring. This is called survival of the fittest, and better is determined by the environment. Each generation is slightly different because some traits, the ones that were bad, were removed by the death of the animals that had those traits. That's natural selection. Small changes add up over millions of years. Many small changes can form a new species. All species today come from species that lived in the past, and all species are united in a single